right, hello and welcome everybody. I see participants are making their way in. It's really good to be with you again for another session of AJU's Biachad Together online programming. And I'm so grateful to my friend Sean Rad, who's willing to give up his really precious time to come and join us for this conversation. I am also grateful to everybody who is taking the time in your evening to come together and do some learning. American Jewish University is a place where people gather to think about ideas and ethics and values, and that's going to be the substance of our conversation together. So welcome to you all, and really, Sean, thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Thank you for having me.
You know, there are not a lot of people who can honestly say that they have changed the entire way that the world does something. But Tinder has fundamentally changed the way that people connect. Start off by telling us the story of how you came to create one of the world's most influential platforms.
Well, so when I've sort of always, I don't want to say struggled, but I always had a fascination with human connection. And it was just always an interesting process. How do people meet? How do people get closer? How do they connect? And there was a period where I was looking at mobile right at the beginning of the iPhone, and just got really interested in mobile. And I was hanging out with my friends I think we were at a restaurant or coffee shop.
I remember those.
Yeah, remember those. Yeah, exactly. And there was like this moment where I'm like looking around me at the table and everyone is on their phone. And like that happens now. That's like a very common thing. But the first thing that went on in my head, I'm like, this is crazy. But how can we actually, we're all together, but we're apart. How can we use this device to sort of bring us together and connect? And I was looking at a girl across the room who we crossed eyes, which never happens. Like it never happened to me. And I was like, like that makes sense. Like we're all walking in this world, and there are people we want to meet, but we're not able to, like, we don't have the courage to walk up and say hello. So what if we made that introductory process just so much more fun and easy and human? And that was the kernel of the idea for Tinder.
And you have a revelation in a bar, like one of those aha moments. And from there to 1.6 billion swipes.
A lot more than that. So yeah, that stat is like from 3 years ago. So I don't know what it is now, but it's probably orders of magnitude bigger.
So take us through that journey. What does it take to revolutionize the dating world?
Well, I mean, it's with any company that, any successful company you look at, or idea or project, it sort of starts from a place of personal passion. And like, you got to really want to, really obsess about an idea. And then it starts with really figuring out, well, okay, what do I need to build this? Who do I need to build this? And being able to inspire those people to join you on this mission. And I had a background in tech, so this was my third company. So, I had made a ton of mistakes, and I was, I sort of knew where to go and who to talk to. So I passed that hurdle. But then at that point, it's just experimenting. It was, I didn't know Tinder would be this big, obviously, going back then. I mean, I believed that we were onto something, but anyone who says they started something big, with foresight, I bet you, they're probably lying. You can't, you can only look at these things and kind of connect the dots looking back and understand, oh, I did this. And at the time, it's a lot of intuition and kind of working with what's in front of you. And then you can look back and say, wow, that actually made a lot of sense.
Was there that moment when you realized this isn't just a success, this is actually starting to change the way that people think and relate? And like, how did that feel? Did that scare you a little bit? Like, oh my God, I've sort of created a monster.
I mean, there were multiple, I think, phases, or I would say like evolutions of personal responsibility that came with this. I think at first it was like, oh, we launched it to just our friends. And the first moment was, I remember there were two distant friends who knew each other, and then they started dating and they met on Tinder. And I'm like, well, these are two people who've seen each other all the time, right, at parties and stuff, but that barrier was never crossed. And because Tinder allowed that to happen, or had the context, again, it was part of my thesis. Like, we're all walking around saying, oh, I really like her, I really like him, but everyone's afraid of rejection, so you're afraid to kind of say that. Tinder makes that easy. So that was like the first, I think, and we were very tiny. This was like in the first 3 weeks where I'm like, whoa, this thing is actually working. And then there was another moment where we had, I think, like a few thousand users, and 99% of them were opening the app multiple times a day, which is like, shocking when you think of like engagement on any product. And we had to like check the metrics a bunch of times to make sure that was correct. And that was like another moment. And then I think where, there's many moments. There are, moments where servers, are crashing and you're kind of like, what is happening? But I think the big moment at a certain point, once I realized, there were enough times where I think I got thanked, or the team got thanked for helping two people meet, that I sort of had this moment where I was like, wow, this is definitely no longer about me. I am in service to this product that has taken this mind of its own, and I'm just like this elected official, elected by the employees, by a team, to kind of guide this thing. But it's no longer mine, and I have a responsibility to kind of protect it for others, for the employees, for investors, and everyone who really had a vested interest. So I think you kind of, as it grows, you gain a bigger sense of responsibility.
Sure. I do between 12 and 20 weddings a year. Not so much right now, though. I just did my first Zoom wedding, and I was just scrolling through the participants. We've got 188 people joining us right now from all over the country, and I see a couple who I married last year in Seattle who met on Tinder. So even in this little box, in this little sample, and I'm sure they're not the only ones for whom you help them find love. So pretty cool. Once again, I'm Rabbi Adam Greenwald. We're here with American Jewish University's Biachad Together. We're here with Sean Rad, tech entrepreneur and the founder of Tinder. Some of you have already started to use the Q&A box. That's great. I will be trying to weave in your questions to Sean as we go. So please do add your questions to the Q&A. Oh, no. Up to that. Please don't, by the way, put them in the chat. One box is more than enough to keep up on. There's a question here. If you were to build Tinder today, what would you do differently?
Oh, great question. I don't think I would do anything different today. But I think if you asked me, based on where technology is headed, I don't think we're there yet, but let's say 5 years from now, what would I do different? I think I probably would think of Tinder as sort of an artificial intelligent matchmaker. Like, if one day I envision, Siri's going to sort of know that there's someone that is nearby, that you went to the same high school and you guys have the same friends and the same interests, and it's going to ask you, do you want to get introduced to this person? And I think, that is a possibility, whether Tinder does it or someone does it. So kind of probably how I would reimagine it. And then I think I would say in probably 10, 20 years, I think would probably exist inside of some virtual VR environment. Even though I don't like the idea of that, because Tinder was always about pushing human connection, physical human connection. But I think you could totally see how virtual becomes a more important part of how people, not only meet, but then get to know each other.
You're on the bridge of the Starship Enterprise. And so before I don't think I can even go there to VR, but I have to pause on this question you raised about AI, because we had a really interesting email exchange about AI back in the fall, which feels like a decade ago. And we're talking about the outsourcing of these ethical and moral decisions that we're used to seeing as an exclusively human area, more and more to algorithms. And that's the content that you see on Facebook, and that's which resumes get in front of an employer's eye. And that's this future you're imagining where AI says, you should really meet this nice boy or this nice girl, like playing the role of the yenta in the synagogue.
Yeah.
And that's pretty amazing, but it feels, as a rabbi, really fraught.
Raises a lot of ethical, I think, questions.
So how do you as a tech leader think about those? What should we be thinking about at the dawn of this AI revolution?
Well, first of all, I think we're already there, whether we realize it or not, right? So if you have a child who's watching YouTube videos, the decision of the next video being recommended, or on Facebook, the item in your feed, really will shape that person's point of view in mind. And that's determined by an algorithm, but that algorithm has zero social responsibility. Its only responsibility is to get you to pay more attention and to serve up content you will gravitate towards, but that's not necessarily content that is healthy or valuable in your life. So and I think you can apply that analogy to something like the digital yenta or whatever. So I think it's a bigger ethical kind of question of how does AI play this role. I believe over time, and it's somewhat inevitable, that I think an AI starts to develop a better understanding of human emotion and better understanding of my individual feelings towards the things, the recommendations it's making, not just, what it algorithmically believes I will like, but, how did that Facebook video or that YouTube video actually impact my sleep? How did it impact my stress levels? How did it sort of impact me on more of a mental health standpoint? Not just did it, grab my attention, and could it make me addicted to it? So I think you'll start to see that becomes a bigger conversation, and ethics and philosophy starts to become a bigger, will have a much bigger role in technology. One thing that you said was interesting about how we're kind of outsourcing functions or things that we do. Again, we're already doing that. So I bet you no one on this call remembers or even knows how to properly use a map, right? We trust Google Maps and Google Local for directions. But once upon a time, that was a fundamental trait of survival and of humanity, was to be able to navigate. And now we sort of, we focus on the authority, which is Google Maps. And Yuval Harari, who's a brilliant Jewish philosopher, very well received and respected in the tech community, he talks about this idea of like authority, where as human beings, we're always looking to a source to tell us if what we're doing is right or wrong, whether that's the rabbi or whether that's God or whether, there are many authorities. And authority is kind of over time, over human history, evolving to kind of be more in the hands of machines. Right now it's in the hands of us as humans. And then I think us shaping those machines becomes a big sort of philosophical question.
Yeah. when we get to the AI Rabbi, I'm not sure that I want to go to that show, but it might be nice to have a Shabbos off. So never know.
I don't think I'll ever get there. I think our spiritual leaders will never be replaced by an AI.
Well, so I want to ask you a little bit about Judaism. You grew up in Jewish day schools, right? You're a Milken grad.
Yeah.
When you're thinking about these big ethical questions that get posed by the revolution that you are part of leading, do you find yourself going back to anything that you learned way back when in synagogue or in school?
Yeah.
Your Jewish background helped to inform you in that?
I think I'd lean on my Jewish values. Maybe not like specifically, a lesson or something, but I think those lessons are kind of embedded in the way that I think. Because I think you hear these stories as you grow up, and I think it's very much helped me navigate the world, even in a position of responsibility and asking these hard questions. I think Judaism has given me that like really good foundation to kind of understand the point. What is the point of this all? And why are we here? And what is our role in the world? So I think that's been even more so now, later in my life, very essential.
Every Friday afternoon, I stick my phone into a Shabbat sleeping bag that Reboot created, and it's really helpful because I am such a. If I was still dating when Tinder was around, I would have absolutely been the person who was on many, many times a day. That little ping of serotonin or dopamine or whatever it is wonderful. But you mentioned YouTube serving up content and keeping us perpetually engaged. The New York Times, The Daily, is doing this amazing series called The Rabbit Hole about YouTube and about that phenomenon. Can you talk about how to sort of balance the entrepreneurial desire to make these products ubiquitous and even maybe a little bit addictive, with also how we preserve mental health in our interactions with them?
Great. So from the perspective of sort of the creators of these products, it's really hard. I mean, I think, if I'm Zuckerberg is probably sitting there saying, oh, I've done good for the world. I've done good for the world. And I've connected people and I've allowed people to share, but is probably a little bit in denial in the areas that has gone wrong, right? Because all technology, and anytime a new thing comes into this world, a new technology, even the wheel, the car, there's this area, there's this kind of experimental time when we're using it, it's improving our lives. And then you get to this moment of abundance where it's so readily available that it kind of changes our lives and it changes the way we think. And then it creates new problems, right? Addictions, or it kills old industries, or it kills old way of doing things. And I've struggled, a lot with this, even when I was at Tinder, or now as I look at different opportunities, which is like, we're almost on one hand headed towards this very, very, very digital world. We're in it right now. I mean, COVID is a perfect example. And that's bringing us closer together, and that's beautiful. Like, imagine if we didn't have Zoom right now, right? But at the same time, it's pulling us further apart because we're trading human connection for efficiency. And but I think, like, every time I kind of go there, I always just remind myself that we're still have evolved, we're still DNA, we still need human connection, real human connection, physical human connection is the only true source, and community is the only true source to happiness. And I've been studying a lot of the aspects of mental health and all the research out there, and kind of in what I'm working on next relates to mental health. And I think what you see is, overwhelmingly, if you look at actual clinical research, right? You can't have well-being without human connection. And, time will tell whether this, will register in our body and our DNA as human connection. But, maybe for my great grandkids, but I don't think for this generation, this will ever replace human connection. So it kind of calms me down because I'm like, okay, give us VR, give us all these tools. I'm still going to crave going out,
Yeah.
right? I'm still going to crave seeing people.
So I've been thinking a lot. I've been teaching all of my Intro to Judaism classes now online, and as so many other educators are. And I've been thinking a lot about when this finally passes. God willing soon. Fauci says 12 to 18 months. Here's hoping. The question about once we've learned that we can live in the cloud, what's that going to look like next? Is my 90-year-old Bubby hosted a Passover Seder on Zoom. And on one hand, it was kind of terrible because we don't sound so good when we all sing together, not on Zoom. On the other hand, my 10-month-old daughter got to share Passover Seder with her great-grandmother, which she may not get to do in person. How do you see us going back to the way it was before? Do you see it changing?
I think it's inevitable that we live with technology, meaning it's unrealistic to say that you're not going to take advantage of the moment where your parent who lives in another city can communicate with your child, and you're not going to appreciate that and value that. But you got to be really careful because you can get sucked in. And I think a world where we're all digital, I don't know if you've seen the latest season of Westworld.
Watches that I haven't yet.
Yeah, well, I mean, it talks about this topic, which is a topic that sci-fi has been talking about for a very long time, which is the more we rely on technology, do our digital lives basically take over our real lives? And you can imagine, I mean, at the rate of technology growth right now, I can put on a VR goggle and I can't smell, taste, feel, but my brain is tricked into thinking that I'm actually at a place that I'm not. And how long will it take? You look at how long will it take before that VR technology gets so good that I can't distinguish between reality and VR, and how long before it can actually interact with my senses? And then if you get to the point, let's just say 20 years from now, where I say, Rabbi Greenwald, you could put on this goggle and be in Israel. Like your body won't distinguish there. You can walk the streets of Jerusalem and you can have this immersive experience, and you can look to your right and left and see your family, but they could be in different parts of the world. It's kind of hard to say, like, do you deny that? Do you deny that technology? So I think as technology progresses, there's all these ethical questions that, like, anyone who right now is a Luddite saying, oh, no, I'm not going to use it. Well, you're only not going to use it because you haven't yet, it's not good enough. But at a certain point when it's good enough, you're definitely going to use it. It's inevitable at the rate of technology, that technology is growing and what it can do for humanity. So I think whatever philosophical questions we're asking now are going to pale in comparison to, I think, the philosophical questions we're going to be asking 20 years from now with technology. But one thing I will say is I don't think tech companies today are taking that seriously enough. I think they're starting to, particularly as you get into the domain of AI. But I also predict that, philosophers, humanitarians, spiritual leaders will start actually having a bigger role in technology and helping answer some of these questions, because geeks behind a computer probably are not the most qualified to answer.
I got stuck on the idea of walking through the streets of Jerusalem through VR and whether they would at some point make it smell like cat pee. There should be a limit. There should be a point at which the technology stops and makes it even better than the real thing. But actually what you said at the end was just where my mind was going, was what kind of leadership do we need to be putting in place to be able to navigate these big questions? Because I'm scared of how much power Zuckerberg has over the way that I think, and another handful of 12 or 20 guys, and frankly, you're one of them, who has such influence. What do you need in terms of partnership?
So I think what we need, there are models and answers when you actually look at the care industry, right? So if you think of a drug, right? Actually, this is relevant to today. There's all these drugs that we're hearing can cure COVID. The reality is you can't really make that claim and make it universally available unless it goes through rigorous studies. You understand how it impacts different cohorts, different groups, not necessarily by the metrics a business looks at, such as revenue, engagement, but by the metrics sort of more of a healthcare company would look at, which is by health or efficacy or whatever. So I think these big companies and startups who are, doing something truly innovative, I think need at a very early stage have some sort of clinical process to say, we're going to benchmark and study what is the impact of our product beyond just revenue, beyond just engagement. So it kind of just starts by a leader like Zuckerberg or Bezos or whoever getting up and saying, I'm creating a new metric of success that is not revenue. And I'm talking about this new metric of success that is social good, or, how much we're giving back to society, but then, and that's where the businesses have responsibility. I think where rabbis, philosophers, historians, clinical scientists have responsibility is to sort of define what is success. That is an area where not everyone agrees, right? So if I told you I could teach YouTube to recommend content that makes me happy, which is actually technically possible. There's AI that can do that. Content impacts you, and I can find what makes you happy and show you content to make you happy. Well, then the question you got to ask is how does the AI really know I'm happy? How do you measure happiness? What is happiness? What? And these are some of the questions that I think religion asks, right? So it's like, in a way, all roads lead back to these bigger questions that we have to ask as a human and as a society. Is like, why are we here? What is happiness? What is health? What is meaning? So I think I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking my language, Sean. And it's exciting to think about what a healthy partnership looks like between, so often there's this battle of STEM versus the humanities, as though it's all a zero-sum game, and you can either go in a science direction or you can read books and think big thoughts. But the truth is our health and our planet and our capacity to do anything is about these different disciplines talking to each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that in there is the answer, is you have to get different disciplines talking to each other. In a slower paced world of technology, that's not needed, because no one product is necessarily crossing over into other disciplines. Zoom is a utility, but in a moment like COVID, Zoom is actually changing our psychology around human connection. But does Zoom as a company see that? Do they feel a responsibility to that? Is there anyone at Zoom asking the question of, how can I make people feel more connected in a video chat? How can I make it more of a human experience? So these are kind of I think the questions these big companies need to start asking. Social questions. And Facebook's asking these questions right now with I think the election tampering was it was like a big awakening. In many ways, a technology that's seen as good and used for good, in had, in a moment fundamentally deprived people of, in certain locations and in a way, of democracy, of access to information. And but no one really talks about it enough, but it is serious. When you follow that trend, it's very, very serious what implications this stuff can have on humanity.
Yeah. So much to ask you about. But, so far we've been talking in one direction about like, what can rabbis and ethicists and philosophers offer to tech innovators to help be a corrective on some potential for excess. I'd love to reverse it, because every real partnership is a reverse. Yeah. Jews have been social disruptors since Abraham went and smashed up his father's idol shop. But the truth is a lot of people our age would say that Judaism has gotten rather stale. We're proud to be Jewish. We are proud of Israel. We're proud of these values, but there's a sense that maybe we're not the disruptors and the innovators that we once were. So you innovate for a living. What do I and we need to know about how we should be thinking differently about Jewish community?
Good question. Well, I think it starts with understanding this, society and group of people that are living online and digesting information in a completely different medium, right? And by the way, if you look throughout human history, you know this better than I do, but like once upon a time, I think, Judaism was very oral, right? The lessons were transferred orally. I'm learning this in your classes. and then we found the medium of books, and the Siddur was born, and we documented this thing. And we have a decision to either look at Instagram, Facebook, and everything as a distraction from what is all good and, old and what we're accustomed to, or do we see it as a new medium and we decide to deliver on that medium? But then it's not enough. I think some people just make the mistake of saying, oh, okay, so people are on Instagram, so I'm going to be on Instagram. But that's not enough, because as you go to a new medium, how you interact with this stuff is different. How a child uses Instagram, there's like a language, there's a hidden language around like, what do they see and what kind of content is good content versus bad content. And I think the more maybe the Jewish, leaders kind of understand these new mediums as users themselves, I think it would maybe give new perspective to how we can reach, this group that is just fundamentally very different than the generation before it. And I'm in this like in between of living with technology, like not growing up with technology really, but like I look at my 8-year-old nephew and I'm like, he's not gonna understand the world any different. So, FaceTime is sort of, yeah, of course I FaceTime every second. And when your rabbi is saying, come to shul and sit in a seat, right, and sing along, that might be he might not connect in that way, right? So I think another thing I would say is how technology can help the religion is like also embracing the fact that technology allows us to send a message all over the world. And I was talking, I won't say who the rabbi is, but I was talking to a rabbi of a prominent temple, and they were asking me, what do we do right now? Because like, do we have these Zoom shuls and everything? And they were saying that like, you can never capture the feeling of the song of being in a room in a community. But even she was kind of debating with like, okay, I can't really capture that energy, but then I can click a button and be broadcasted to our community who's really all over the United States. Right. And then I have all these heads on the Zoom thing, and as I'm singing, other people are moving in front of their camera, and there is an energy there. Yeah. So you start to see, well, okay, it's not the real thing, but it's also something that the real thing can't do. If I'm in temple, I can't see everyone, on a screen and kind of see their facial reactions and feel their energy. I can only see the person to the right or left of me and the back of the head of the, person in front of me. So, I think embracing it starts with maybe just embracing it and understanding it and being open to adapting to it instead of afraid of it.
I would love to see you design a curriculum for a rabbinical school class. Like, what is it that we need to know going into the world? Because what I hear you saying is these aren't either or choices; they're both and choices, right? We're not aiming to live entirely through our screens. We do need the warmth of human connection. We do need to be able to put our arms around each other, and also, it is totally amazing that hundreds of people could come and join in this conversation without getting on the 405 freeway, right? There are lots of people who, if you were coming up to speak at AJU, it would be a real schlep for them to get to, and they might have kids asleep in the other room.
And to give the VR, like, you could look at the VR Jerusalem and say, oh my gosh, now no one's going to go to Jerusalem and no one, and we're all, or you could look at it and say, wow, we're now going to inspire a lot of people to get on a flight and go to Jerusalem, right? We're now going to inspire a lot of people because of this talk to consider Judaism more and go deeper. I think it's as you said, it's not or, it's and, right? There's no reason why the light thing, the digital thing, isn't a gateway to the real thing. Just like if I meet someone on Tinder, right? I'm still going to meet that person in real life. And if I want to, hook up, get married, whatever, there's a physical interaction. And who cares if it happened in a bar or online or what led to that outcome, as long as it's leading to that outcome.
So that the resistance to that is generational, right? You talk about your 8-year-old nephew who has no idea why we would even need to have this conversation because they just live in the cloud. And then we talk to people who are a generation above us who maybe are a little bit more skeptical. Though I got to say, they've been doing amazing. My mother is on the Zoom. I think maybe your mother is too. And they have been really stepping up during COVID. How do we make this accessible? This is a lot of the questions in the chat have circled around, like, how do we make this accessible to people of every demographic and also of different socioeconomic statuses? I'm thinking a lot about those issues of equity.
That's a great question. I don't think there's anything we could do on this call other than help one-on-one educate. And, you want to help in Judaism, our values are help the community. And I think one small way you can contribute is if you're a young kid, teach your grandparents how to use Zoom and how to use technology. Like, I taught my grandma how to use the iPhone and everything, and it actually opened her world because now she's FaceTiming the kids and grandkids and everything. So I think it starts with that. And then I think on a broader sense, I would hope that the leaders of these companies and the innovators, or anyone on this call who wants to become an innovator, has ideas of how you can make these tools better. I just think in the areas, we tend to look at technology sometimes and say, oh, it's evil, it's bad, and therefore we should throw it away, versus the way we should look at it is, it's not perfect. We need to make it better, right? And if we don't make it better, who will? And I think that's kind of the approach I've always had with technology. And I think it's you can't fight it. So it's like, help guide it, is sort of the way I think about it.
Great. We're starting to get toward time, but I wanted to ask you a little bit more about you. You have achieved this unbelievable level of success at a really young age. You said you struck out on 2 companies, but seriously nailed it on the 3rd. I clearly went into the wrong field. But you told me that I have a role to play too. And you've had all of this success, but you have had some significant ups and downs, of course, of that. And I'm wondering, we're all thinking a lot about how to be more resilient at a time that's challenging our resilience. Are there things that, life lessons that you have learned from these years and from your success and from your challenges that we might benefit from?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, like I always ask, it's funny when I hear people who are like, "Oh, you built this in the garage and it just became an overnight success," and and it's like, I'm very fortunate, but I mean, I've had a very difficult time, like getting to where I mean, there's been a ton of failure. There's been a ton of crying nights. There's been sacrificing my happiness and my social life and so many things. So there's a lot of sacrifice, but I think whenever I've been in a hard moment or experiencing anything hard, whenever I've had the attitude of what can I learn from this moment and how can I improve, life just gets better. And then you look back at those hard moments and you're like, oh, it was meant to be. Growing up, my grandparents and my mom always would say, oh, it's meant to be, it's meant to be, it's meant to be. And I think that is a very spiritual equivalent of what I'm talking about. You can say it's meant to be, or you can take a more, and that's kind of putting your faith in the universe and don't stress about it, do the best you can. Or you can take a little more responsibility and say, the world, my environment has changed. How can I change to take advantage of this? So how can I, if I'm a temple and I've lost my congregation, how can I actually find new ways to bring them together at scale? If I'm a business and am struggling, how can I use this as an opportunity to make my business better? If I'm stressed, what can I learn about that stress? So I think really it comes down to curiosity and learning and being open and not crushing and just kind of leaning into it, standing up and saying, I'm going to fight this, but I can only fight it through learning and adapting.
I mean, and I don't want to be parochial about this. There are lots of people in the world who do this, but this is something that there's a particular Jewish genius for.
Yeah.
Right? There's a Jewish genius for how to look at when the world falls apart, whether it's your personal world or the bigger world. How do we take the pieces and reshuffle them to make something which lasts? I've got
One thing I learned in our classes is Israel means to wrestle with God, right?
Yeah.
To be an Israelite, and I think the life without wrestling, you can't grow without wrestling, and I think that's the message in Judaism too. And it's like, how much was I taught growing up that like ask questions, challenge, debate, and I think in many ways that's how you should approach life at a down moment. It's like ask questions, debate, and wrestle. Don't give up, and you'll get through it.
Couldn't have said it better. I know that what you're working on right now is a little top secret, so I'm not asking anything that you to divulge anything, but can you tell us anything about like what are some of the big questions you're thinking about these days and what you think might be part of your next chapter?
Yeah, we talked a lot about it actually on this call, but the things that I'm thinking a lot about are mental health. I think the world has grown far more complex in the last 10 years than probably the last, the 500 years before that. Like it's become complex, and we sort of assume we have the tools. And in many ways, religion is a tool to kind of manage the world and manage your mental health and keep your spirits high. But even, religion is evolving and going through a phase of defining its role. So I think like how we actually understand our own mental health and emotional health and how we conquer it, I think is really, really critical to humanity. And just if you look statistically, suicide under the age of 30, where you kind of put aside more physiological or sort of aging diseases, the number one source of death is addiction. The second source of death is suicide. Well, those are both mental health related. So I think any parent watching this, it's like, you got to ask yourself, are you actually taking the time, sitting with your kid, talking about their emotions, building resilience, helping them get through things, build skills, or are you taking this more traditional approach of suck it up, smack on the, get back on the field and you could do it. So I think, we need to kind of change as society to welcome the discussion of mental health, to welcome the discussion of emotional health. And I hope technology will guide us towards that as well.
Sean, I would imagine that a lot of the people who joined thinking this conversation was going to be one thing, and you have led us down some really amazing roads. And just, I've heard a lot of rabbis give sermons in which, unfortunately, Tinder or things like it wind up getting used as the straw man to talk about the breakdown of our society and neglect of mental health. And really, you're inviting us to think about the partnership between the ways in which the world is shifting and the ways in which human beings stay the same. Mm-hmm. And in that intersection between our humanness and all of this that we've created, there's such tremendous potential for good. And I'm so grateful that you are one of the people out there and asking these questions and excited to see where it goes. This conversation is going to be recorded and should get out there. And I hope it's the beginning of many more. I have to ask you before we sign off, for those people who signed up for this, I'm in a happy marriage. You have a absolutely wonderful girlfriend who I've gotten the chance to learn with over the course of this last year. But this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to ask the founder of Tinder for dating advice. Anything for the people that they should know about dating and love?
I'm not the expert. Just because I created Tinder, in many ways it's because, I'm like you, I'm learning about dating. That's why I created it, but I'm happy to try. I think I have a pretty successful relationship, thankfully. So.
Yeah, well, she's wonderful. So tell us, any tips or learning from living in this world of love, particularly if it's relevant for COVID times. Any dating advice?
Get on Tinder. It's actually pretty effective right now. If you taking a little, let's put the humanity aside for a second. It's kind of awesome that you can get on Tinder, match with a bunch of people, have a bunch of initial conversations from your couch, and doesn't mean that that's not going to lead to a marriage or a friendship or even a hookup or whatever it leads to. But I think it's kind of beautiful that you can stay at home, be isolated, but then connect with new people. And that's important. It's important to society. So I think use Tinder, use other dating apps, use FaceTime, use technology. I mean, this is a great time for people to experiment with the power of technology and also build their own thesis on where it plays a role in their lives and where it doesn't. It's really a personal thing.
Did you and Lizzie meet on Tinder?
We didn't. We met through work, but not through Tinder.
Fair enough. Can't put you on a billboard. All right. Sean Rad, thank you so much for taking your time to join us from the bridge of the Starship Enterprise to really give us so much to think about and to chew on. Grateful for you and for your time. Grateful to everybody who came to join us for another AJU Biachad Together program. There are so many amazing learning opportunities that are coming up over the next few weeks, and I'm sure over the next few months. So please check back and come for many more of these wonderful conversations.
Thank you, Rabbi Greenwald. You're awesome. And one thing I want to say, I mean, what you're doing at AJU is another way I think that brings Judaism closer to kind of this new generation by just explaining it in such, it's the same content, just the way you explain it. I love these classes. So it's just such a like I'm rediscovering Judaism as a Jew by being in these classes. And I think that's kind of a model. Another thing to kind of look at is how are we teaching these lessons? Can we teach them in, kind of more engaging, simplified, more relevant ways?
Thank you so much. That means really a lot. That means a lot. All right. Thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful night. Stay safe and stay well.